Okay, so you've got to look long term, and you have to take a look. You can't just sit there and go from there to here. So we had a very big El Nino, and it came across a whole different thing. And so you can't just do that. It's long-term, large-scale, lots of records. That's what I told you. Remember about the ice sheets. That's how you have to do it. Watch out for the mythbusters, the truth tellers, and the falsifiers. The ones who say, I've got one exception and I've disproved the rule. I'm Karl Popper, if any of you know the philosopher who said scientists falsify by showing a contrary piece of evidence and you throw out the hypothesis. Nonsense. That works. You have a fluid in the tube, you don't know if it's an acid or a base, you put in a piece of litmus paper, red or blue, you can falsify a hypothesis that it's acid or base. That's about it. I mean, anything complex, you can't. You don't know if the data is collected correctly, you don't know what it means, you don't know what you left out. It took us 22 years to figure out that the satellite temperatures derived from satellites looking at the emissions of microwaves from oxygen atoms in the atmosphere were not telling us the atmosphere is cooling, but it was a mistake of the guys doing it because they didn't correct for the downward drift of the satellite. In fact, it was this town that did it. It was Wentz and Schabel who showed that was going on, and when you accounted for the drift of the satellite, you could then get the satellite to agree with thermometers. So we do not falsify in the short run, only over a very long period of time. Nobody should come along and tell you, I have the piece of evidence which proves it for sure, or the piece of evidence which disproves it. There's no such thing. It takes the community a long time to sort through it. That is the point that I want to get to. Okay. So winter comes later to Greenland, which is sending me to another point. Is this good or is this bad? We'll get there in a minute because good and bad is not. Remember the question was, do we know enough for policy? Enough and good and bad are those words of science? No, those are words of value. Those are policy words. Those are things that you care about, for which legitimate, honest people can have fundamental disagreement, which is why we have a political process to adjudicate value disputes. We'll get to that. Next. Okay. This has been observed. Increasing Atlantic temperatures, increasing intensity of hurricanes in the last 20 to 30 years. It was also predicted, so this is a validation. But the author of this, Kerry Emanuel, would never claim it's a validation because 20 years is too short for him to be highly confident it wasn't just a natural fluctuation. You got a 25% chance that the oceans would have gone up just randomly, or a 25% chance the power dissipation of the hurricanes would have gone up. So he also looked in the Pacific. Funny thing, weaker but still very strong positive correlation. Now you're down to 12% chance. It's starting to get toward likely, to very likely. So this is how scientists do it. They try to look at multiple lines of evidence, figure out what the probability of chance is, and then try to assign a category to it based upon the relative likelihood that this is just a random fluctuation. And it gets harder and harder for most of the global warming evidence to take a refuge that it's just nature being perverse again. Okay, next one. IPCC said it's more likely than not, that's 50 to 90%, that's to 70%, that recent observed increases in hurricane intensity are connected to warming, and that future storms are likely to intensify even more with further global warming. Next one. But hasn't it all happened before? I can't tell you how many petroleum geologists we have here. None. Another group. They love to tell me that one because they've studied the history of climate and they know it's been warmer before, and they're right. And I have no trouble with somebody saying it's been warmer before. So how do you explain this one? I can live with that question. What I shake my head at is, it's warmer before, therefore this one's just another natural accident. Where did that therefore come from? Not from any good science, that's for sure. So what I like to do, and I got asked that question in front of Congress when somebody said exactly the same thing, is I said last year, I had a norovirus. Any of you ever have that? This awful, horrible stomach virus at 102 Fahrenheit fever for 3 days. It was miserable. I said, so since all fevers are created the same, just like all planetary warmings are created the same, by this is the same logic, therefore the next time I have 102 fever, it must be the norovirus. Or maybe I might go to the doctor and find out whether it happens to be pneumonia, or malaria, or a kidney infection, or any one of any other things. That's why we do science. We do diagnostics to find out. And we know why it was warmer. Next one. We know why it was warmer 125,000 years ago by 1 to 2 degrees than it is now. We need the changes in the Earth's orbit characteristics to trigger the comings and goings of warming and cooling, but then we need amplification of that through greenhouse gas feedback. It doesn't lead it, it doesn't cause it. What it does is it's a positive feedback. It just amplifies the difference and actually brings the southern hemisphere in the action. These are consistent theories. That is exactly when scientists increase their subjective confidence, is when they get increasingly consistent confirmation on multiple lines of evidence. And again, that's what IPCC does and has been doing through 4 rounds. Okay, next one, please. And sometimes these critics who say, oh, it's all happened before, forget to mention when it was 1 to 2 degrees warmer, sea level was 5 meters higher, and Greenland was largely missing, and probably some of West Antarctica. So you want to argue that it's precedented to be warmer, I'm going to say, and therefore, oh, it's all natural. Well, okay, so let's expect 5 meters of sea level rise. Not a good thing in most coastal locations to get that. And I don't think it's quite coming up here. Maybe your real estate values will go up. But you know, not everybody loses. But somehow I think we're on the planet, and I don't think you're going to like the fires and some of the droughts. So we don't have to have every single negative event happen to us. I mean, somewhere along the line, I think that stewardship is a value that is recurring. We'll find out for sure next November 6th. But and if you don't go there on November 6th, we may not find out. Okay, next one. All right, I promised you I'd show you that we know for sure that greenhouse gases are going up. And humans did it. Here's 10,000 years. These are, how do we know what was going on before humans were measuring it? Because they're trapped in the bubbles and ice sheets. You know, the snow has air in it, and then the snow falls on it, compresses it to ice, and it gives you a library of the history of the Earth's atmosphere. It's basically the geological, geochemical libraries of Alexandria. And by the way, they're melting like mad in high tropical glaciers. And a friend of mine, Lonnie Thompson from Ohio State, who did the work at Kilimanjaro, among others, has a lot of these ice cores in a lab in Ohio State, as I said. And I said, Lonnie, I hope you have a backup generator. And he said, no. I said, no. He says, I have 2. I said, good. And you didn't make the mistake of the hospitals in New Orleans. He said, what was that? I said, there they are, flood-prone city, below sea level. And where did they put the generator, those brilliant administrators? In the basement. Anyhow, you know, redundancy. I said, your second one should be a fuel cell, and it should be on the roof. It should be powered by biofuel. Anyhow, so we have the 35% increase in CO2 and 150% increase in methane and nitrous oxide. These are hockey sticks. They're indisputable. We did them. It's beyond any doubt. We know that from isotopic ratios and emissions. That's not the hard part. Next. The Earth is also warming, and that we have the evidence I've been talking about from ice caps and from mountain glaciers, but there's also the thermometers of the world, and they tell you the same story. Plants are blooming earlier, the roses are blooming earlier in your grandmother's backyard, you know, birds coming back earlier in spring migration on all continents. And it's a completely consistent picture, to which IPCC used the incredibly rare word unequivocal. And I even got mad at them, and I said, well, it's a probability of unequivocal. We didn't define it. And they said, if you can't figure it out, kiddo. That's not usual language, because the convergence in the multiple lines of evidence is just so obvious and consistent with theory. There really is no other logical explanation, though I'm certain those famous climate professors would go up there in feigning of anger about how you're being bamboozled by that guy who's just trying to make money on you. Oh, I forgot to tell you that story. Let me tell you my answer to that when they say they're just trying to make money. So when we were accused of trying to make grants by scaring people, I said, okay, so we're dishonest. They don't like to be nasty, but they basically agree. Yeah, so you think we're dishonest, because that's what anybody who would say something they don't believe to get money would do. I know that nobody does that in any other professions, especially you. But did you know, you're also accusing us of stupidity. They look at me like, no, we're not. We're accusing you of clever dishonesty. I said, well, if we were clever, then what we would be doing to get rich by grants is we'd be telling people that nothing is unequivocal, everything is uncertain, and you face all these catastrophes that might happen or might not, so we better study them real fast, so give us all that money. So the more we say unequivocal and very likely, the stupider we are, because the more we actually are flying in the face of the very accusation you made, or perhaps you're not thoughtful, or worse, you're lying. I let you all choose which. Next one. So we ended up with a Nobel, and there's my wife, Terry Rude, and my other colleagues, and we went, and by sheer absolute chance, the Vice President Tipper happened to have been in Palo Alto, and also by absolute chance, Francoise is going to laugh, I happen to have been in Palo Alto, and it's not very common either. You don't believe that, ask my dean. But some of you are professors, you all know dean's just another four-letter word. But anyway, so we did the, just kidding. So we did the press conference, and after a 5-minute statement, he did something I've never seen him do in the 20 times I've been on a program with him, including testifying to his first hearing on climate in 1981. And that is, he walked out without answering questions. I couldn't believe it. I mean, you usually can't stop it. People are, exhausted before he's ready to quit. And he said, the IPCC guys will do it, and we did for a couple hours. And I then later figured out why he did it. Because he didn't want them to ask him 497 times when he's running for president, who's running, who has better climate policy, because that's exactly what they would have done. And there have been studies done by social scientists who study the media about climate change, and they find, yeah, there are a lot of studies in the media about climate change, but they're not from the political reporters. The political reporters don't ask it. They ask a guy who just got a Nobel Peace Prize for climate what he thinks about people running for office. That's not what he's there for. So, you talk about doing something because it sells the product. And of course, we're buying the product, so you have to rethink that too. All right. How about the Inuit culture being driven to extinction? They're not going to die. So how do you weigh ecological value, biodiversity, cultural diversity versus direct return on investment? There are people in the world who think only the latter should be put into a cost-benefit analysis and determine policy. There are others, about 85% of the world outside of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget and their followers, who think it's a fundamentally immoral principle for decision-making. So we have a deep paradigmatic divide with many other countries in the world that I observe every time I go to UN-sponsored meetings. It's critical that people of these different views get a chance to fight it out and learn where each other is coming from, because without that you have no chance of a compromise. And to work some kind of shared solution. But the solution will have to recognize that it isn't all cash flow transactions, and it isn't also all per capita entitlements, because some countries have been populating too fast. There's going to have to be a deal where people are going to have some give and take on some of their hot button at home political issues. Otherwise, we're going to continue on the track we're on now, which is greenhouse gases rising above the highest UN projection from the year 2000, above. So we are now heading toward tripling or more of carbon dioxide, and I don't hesitate to consider that a very dangerous future for our children and grandchildren, for most of the planet. We have got to get off that track. It's not going to happen by accusatory fingers. It's going to require 3 strategies. First of all, be efficient at home. Don't tell your kid to turn off the computer when you don't turn off the light. Don't tell them that they should be, buying an efficient car when you make 5 trips downtown when a little planning could have done 2. I mean, be part of it, be a role model that means it. buy efficient products, including automobiles, go downtown and look at Zap cars. I mean, there are all kinds of new technologies coming along. The second thing we need is public-private partnerships in innovation, where you can actually help us invent our way out of it. California is a world leader at that. But in order to do that, you need learning by doing experiments. That means you have to invent the products and then test them. It's not R&D that's so much our problem. It's RD&D. It's the second D, deployment, testing. We've got to get it cheaper, socially acceptable, and cool. You need all three things in order to get it to really take off. And that means we need investment. But to get investment, you need return on investment from the private sector. Many of these are speculative. So here's where public-private partnerships come along to help get the investment over the hump. Not just in the US or in Canada or in Australia or in Europe, but we have to help provide those investment opportunities in China and in India and other places, for which I think the deal should be shared patents with Western companies, funded in part by Western companies over a period of time that decreases with time, and you try to move toward the win-wins instead of the your responsible pointy finger, not always the nice pointy finger. And then the final thing is you can't dump your tailpipe and smokestack wastes and your deforested wastes in the atmosphere with impunity as if it's an unpriced sewer, because that's not going to allow market forces to work and provide incentives. So it's the combination of those things. This state has actually tried to address all of them. We haven't figured out the implementation yet. It's not a trivial thing to do, but we're moving quickly. Other states are doing it. The planet is finally starting to move in that direction. We're about 25 years too late. Somebody said to me at a press conference the other day, well, Steve, some people think that we have only 10 more years left to solve the problem. What do you think? And I said, well, I think that was true when Roger Revelle and I and Gordon MacDonald first testified to the Ribicoff Committee in 1979 about this problem, why we shouldn't use oil shale and tar sands to try to solve our fuel consumption problems with cars. We should put cars on a diet instead. And of course we went nowhere. We had 10 years then. We're way past the condition where we can prevent some dangerous changes like the fires and the hurricanes and things like that I mentioned. But the number of systems threatened and the depth to which they are threatened goes up dramatically as we keep warming. So I don't get hung up on things like, oh, well, we have 10 years. Just because it's too late doesn't mean there isn't lots more we can do. Let's just go on, do as much as we can, as fast as we can, and as fairly as we can. That's the right paradigm. Don't get hung up on numbers that you can't really defend easily scientifically. And last sentence. And then, let's get off this frame. 2 degrees. We have till there's 2 degrees warming and then it's too late. That's what I call the on-the-beach syndrome. Remember On the Beach, some of you younger types? Right? The Northern Hemisphere nuclear war, the radioactive cloud of death is going to Australia. So since everybody's going to die, you might as well drive fast and get killed in an auto race. It's not a good idea to tell people there's no hope, particularly when it's not true. The fact that there'll be increasing damages doesn't mean that you still can't fix a lot and prevent even worse. So the objective is not to prevent things you can't prevent, but to prevent things you can prevent and have it much less bad than it would have been, and even take advantage of